Welcome to Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives, a weekly dive into the world of immigration law and its human consequences. This is your host, Stephen Robbins, joined shortly by co-host and fellow immigration attorney, Matthew Archambault. This week, we're talking about lots of cool, fun, new things in immigration law. We've got these asylum agreements with Central American countries now, including Guatemala and pretty soon Honduras, where we can send people who are seeking asylum at our southern border to Guatemala, pretty soon Honduras, and there were plans to send Mexicans to Guatemala, Mexican asylum seekers. But anyways, we talk about all that. It's basically a giant show, and nobody really knows exactly what's going on. It's really, really disturbing. We also talk about Jared Kushner. He was tasked with fixing all of this, of course. And it turns out his grandparents, who fled the Holocaust and were granted a visa to the United States, they may have committed some slight misrepresentations, but material ones, no doubt, in order to secure their visa here in the United States. So we talk about Jared Kushner's position on refugee resettlement and the fact that the administration has the lowest numbers of refugee resettlements in over 40 years. I think maybe the lowest numbers ever. It's pretty sad. But anyhow, really depressing show. You know, we keep talking about making happier shows, and I don't know if it's going to be possible until maybe November of 2020. If you want to listen to really happy shows, which are happy at the time but sad in retrospect, you can go back and listen to our shows after Obama announced DAPA. That was a real exciting time. We thought, oh man, we're going to be able to help so many people. It's going to be great. And here we are. So I think maybe the best thing to do, because there's only so much we can do to stop the sort of influx of depressing news, the best thing you can do is try and become a force for change. Specifically, there's lots of local organizations you can get involved with, obviously, who stand up for immigrant rights, but also in terms of this upcoming election. I mean, if you aren't actively engaged in your local party or planning on voting in the primary or even up to speed on who the candidates are and what they support, I would encourage you to do that. And also to just vote for Bernie. I think it's becoming more and more clear that that's probably the way to go. So anyhow, enjoy the show. If you like it, you can become a patron at patreon.com/redirect. You can subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, leave reviews, say nice things. We really appreciate all of your support. Now here's a conversation with Matthew. All right, Matthew, I wanted to talk about two annoying things that have happened to me recently. But first, I want to talk about this Law and Crime article about a judge who was suspended after allegedly seeking a threesome with an attorney. Now, I just want to make sure the attorney is not in trouble here, right?
It appears not. It appears that the attorney is a snitch.
Right. Okay. I just want to make sure because I'm pretty much constantly being barraged with three-way requests from judges. And
I have to admit I had to alter some of my motions to the court because I originally thought it was coming from the attorney and that was wrong. But apparently it's wrong if it comes from the judge. So, right. Yes, my motion to change positions is still valid.
Okay.
That's
Maybe
right.
we could talk about this story. All right. So a Kentucky judge was suspended Friday after she allegedly tried to leverage an attorney into a threesome and retaliated against people who didn't support her re-election campaign enough. Wow.
She's going to be an immigration judge soon. That's my prediction.
She had 40 voicemails from the BIA and all these different immigration courts.
Hey, you thinking about a career change?
What a story. Okay, so let me tell you about two things that have happened. They're smallish, but they embody the barrage of nonsense that we have to deal with. So the first is this summer I had a new client come in. She hired me to help her with her asylum case. And she's been in the country since 2015 seeking asylum. And she's been pro se this whole time. So she found a notario to help her with her asylum application. It was very poorly filled out and filed with the immigration court. And she was scheduled for a final hearing in January on the 7th of this month. Now, she had filed a motion to change venue on her own because she now lives in Washington in 2018. And the judge said, no, not changing venue because this case has been going on a long time and it's just going to further delay proceedings if we move the case. And so I was, very confident that hiring an attorney would make a difference on this particular motion. So
You referred her to someone?
I referred her to a competent attorney. And so I filed a motion to change venue, knowing that, this judge had a particular concern. So I put in my motion that we would seek an expedited hearing once the case got to Seattle. We're not going to dilly-dally. That's not our intention. And also specifically highlighting the fact that I don't know how often, but it feels like 50% of the time we show up for an individual hearing and it's been reset because the judge is sick or they've been reassigned or they've double booked. That's been happening a lot. And this is a client with a lot of kids, and I don't want to fly to Dallas and then have this case be reset. And the motion got denied. So we throw all our effort into this case and prep evidence and declarations and briefings. And guess what happened? You're never going to believe it.
You went forward with it and you had a fair and just hearing in Dallas.
No, actually the case was reset.
What?
Yeah. So this judge got apparently assigned to, I think, these MPP.
But this case it had to be heard,
It had to be heard. It's been on the docket since 2015. How dare you even waste the court's time asking to further delay proceedings? But actually, no, the case is being reset. It hasn't even been recalendared yet. It's just sitting there. It says there's no hearing scheduled.
Do you think maybe he'll change venue now?
Well, so I filed a new motion arguing I told you so. Another cool thing about this was when I bought my ticket through Alaska, and we have a powerful podcast. So now maybe when we ask for stuff, we'll get it. I don't know. But I bought the cheap tickets, which aren't protected, but then they offer you trip protection on the back end.
Ooh,
like a travel insurance.
That's like $7 or something. Or
So it's I'm definitely doing that. So I bought it. And I called to cancel the flight, and they said, well, we can't refund you, but if you bought trip protection, you call the insurance company. So I called them. It turns out,
did they laugh?
Yeah, having a work thing get canceled is not one of the reasons why you can be protected.
Yeah, it's this thing, when you go to buy those things, if you actually read it, you would have known that.
I would have known that basically somebody has to die.
I think you have to die.
I would have had to die to get some percentage of my money back. So just a big, massive fail all around. That's a cool thing that we're dealing with. And then one other thing. So I've always liked practicing in Yakima. We've got this nice little USCIS office. It's got a real local vibe, very small. And we've always been able to email the field office director with hey, what's going on with this case? Or, oh, hey, I'm double booked for this thing, and can I reschedule this or whatever? And so we just got a new field office director. Seems like a nice guy. I had to say that because I don't actually know. But
no, he's
listening.
One of the best.
He's one of the best guys.
The best.
But I emailed him about some cases. Now I'm sitting on 5 or 6 cases that have been interviewed in October, November, and we still don't have a decision, which is unusual for this local office. Is that your experience? Do you ever have that where you have the interview and it just sits around?
There are interviews where they make decisions?
Well,
there are cases nowadays that have resolutions to them? Wow, that's...
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it happens a lot.
Oh, really? Okay, well, see, maybe I was just spoiled before. We would either get decisions right away.
I mean, are there cases that, not to get too into the weeds, that are somewhat complicated or anything like that?
No, these are I would understand it if because we had one not too long ago that, got held up, but the guy had a rap sheet, right? So he kept coming in and bugging me hey, what's going on? What's going on? And I told him, probably want to maybe give them their time on this for now. But no, these are all straightforward cases. So I emailed him and said, hey, can you just look into these? And He responded with like a cut and paste, "You can check out our tools at uscis.gov. And if you need further assistance, you can call the 800 number." And the 800 number is not helpful.
No.
So
It used to be to get, they call it info pass, where you could go and ask these types of questions. Or if your client had to get a green card that they got granted in court and they had to get the processing done, you could go online, you make a nice appointment and you go there and everything was fine.
chat with somebody.
Now you have to call a 1-800 number. You have to wait on hold for an hour. You speak to someone and then they say, okay, someone will call you back in 2 to 3 business days. Oh, and by the way, we may call you on a Saturday. If you don't answer the phone, you're going to have to start the process all over again. And inevitably, they'll call on a Saturday, you know.
Right.
So it's
what's nuts about that is this is the system now after we had a really basic and simple and easy to use online booking system. Like
like someone, usually they have like outside people come in and they're like, how to get more efficient and all that. They must have like had them come in and go, okay, how do we screw this up? Like, here's an idea.
Yeah. This system is working too well. Like, what do we do? How can we make this more convoluted? And it's just frustrating because this is an office that's literally down the street from my office. It's tiny. Like, if I called the guy and said, can you look at this file? He could walk and find the file anywhere it was in the office within 45 seconds. I mean, this is a small place. And instead of being able to contact them, I've got to call an 800 number. Now, what they're going to do after I'm on hold and I finally talk to a person, if it's a basic question, they can give me a service request number sometimes. And then what they do is they contact the local office, who will then respond to them and generate some sort of response, which will then be emailed to me. So this is now the system that we have. And one of the frustrations is I called the 800 number about a green card that was returned. And they said, well, if she needs proof of her residency, we can just do an info pass until the card arrives and they can put a stamp in her passport. It's no big deal. So they helped me schedule the info pass. You know, they called me back, did the whole thing you said. And the client went to her info pass and the local office said, oh, no, you need an emergency. We can't put a stamp in your passport. So, you know, this is a kind of...
Yeah, that's not really a thing.
Needing an emergency or putting a stamp?
No, need an emergency to get a stamp in your passport.
Right.
Yeah, so things do get frustrating. So since we're airing some grievances, this is a little post-Festivus spot. So I was in court, and so to try to make this as concise as possible, my client is a beneficiary on a U visa application, and his mom and his dad were both granted deferred action, which means that they're going to grant the U visa, but it's not quite ready yet because of the visa numbers. And this was back in 2017, and we got an RFE for him that we answered, and we just haven't heard anything from him. It's not that big a deal. He's a kid, so it's not that big of a deal. I guess now he's actually 22, but he hasn't been bothering us. So we're like, oh, well, we keep doing service requests, and he keeps having court dates that come and go, and we do motions to continue. This time I thought, you know what? Let me go to court. Maybe the trial attorney has some insight into what's going on. So I show up to court, and first of all, trial attorney is like, I don't have the file. And I'm like, oh, well, that's good. Is that the service center? She's like, yeah. I'm like, well, can you see any information about the U visa? She's like, no. And she's not even looking. So whatever. Okay, so at least the file is where it's supposed to be. So that's good.
Right.
So the judge is like, well, what's going on? And it's a new judge. And I said, well, he's received like 5 continuances before. I'm asking for another continuance based on the same thing. We're waiting for the U visa. I provide documentation of everything. And she's like, well, it says here deferred action. I'm like, yeah, his parents had deferred action, and he should have deferred action soon. But you're saying deferred action, and then you say U visa. What do you mean? I'm like, ugh. So then you have to explain immigration law to the immigration judge, which is annoying.
She's new to immigration law?
But she's an immigration judge. Like,
so her background's in like bankruptcy or something?
Yeah, it's not in immigration. So anyways, I politely explain it. And she's like, you know, this case has been on the docket since 2013. I'm like, yeah, okay. So anyway, so we're just seeking a continuance, based on a U visa. She's like, well, what's the underlying application? I'm like, there's no underlying application. It's just based on the U visa, seeking for continuance. She goes, well, I don't find good cause. You can come back in March and file an application for relief, or he'll have to take voluntary departure.
By himself, because his parents are already in deferred action.
And I'm like, well, so are you denying the motion to continue? She's like, yeah, there's no good cause. And so this is where judges get upset, and I don't know why they get upset. And I said, Your Honor, can you please articulate what you're ruling, that there's no good cause? And she's like, I just told you. He's been in court since 2013. And so then I'm waiting, and I realized that was it. And I'm like, that's not like, that's like the beginning of a ruling.
Right.
That's like the first, he has been in court since 2013. We have granted him multiple continuances, but she can't even articulate it because she's just getting these like marching orders. And then I start citing some case law and stuff like that. And she's like getting more and more annoyed with me.
Right.
So now we go back in March and I have two options. One is be like, screw you. We're not filing anything. We'll just appeal you and win, or file an asylum application and then just clog up the court more.
Right.
But apparently that's what, they desire.
Now, any sane judge would have said, like, you know what? I'm terminating proceedings. This is ridiculous. Like, this guy's parents have deferred action.
Or administratively closed, but they can't do that, right?
Right. Well, I would probably, if it were me, and if you were allowed to do this sort of thing, I'd just terminate. And I'd tell DHS, like, you're welcome to follow up. And if for some reason his deferred action is denied, like both his parents are granted and he's denied, which would be really weird. But if for some reason in 6 months you can check the file, and if that's happened, then you can put him back in proceedings. But we're confident that that's probably not going to happen. And like, that's it. It would all be over.
But, it's just like the look on this judge's face when she's pulling out what I gave her. And she's like, this is deferred action and this is a U visa. Like, what are you doing? Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm the complete idiot. Now, trust me, if I was in like a bankruptcy court.
You are an idiot.
Yeah, that's true. She nailed it for different reasons. But if I was in a bankruptcy court and I said, this is a document A and this is a document B, what are you talking about? I wouldn't say that. I would be like, oh, can you explain this to me? Because I don't know what this is. And just assuming like the guy's an idiot. And it's just like, it's just frustrating. Like, immigration law is hard to explain to the regular person. And having to sit there and like teach the immigration judges about basics in immigration law. And she's been on the bench now for a year or so. This is not the first U visa she's seen, that's come across her desk. So
what happens, I think, is the sort of affirmative stuff, the family stuff, the U visas and these sorts of things that immigrants can do outside of the court context. The judges just don't come across it enough and they don't get any training on it. And so like, I once had a judge and a TA after a detained hearing, and I was like a brand new practitioner. I didn't know anything, but they kind of pulled me aside. Well, I'm not brand new. I still don't know anything, but they kind of pulled me aside and they were like, hey, how does the unlawful presence waiver work with like a consular processing? Like, can you like explain it? And I had to explain that this whole process, which is fairly elementary, but they just don't.
Yeah,
know.
You think they would get trained in that? Because so many judges are so cavalier. They're like, yeah, well, you can just go back and consular process. And, it'll be a year or so with the waiver.
Right, for somebody who's like subject to the permanent bar.
Or they have permanent bar and they can't do that. They're like, oh, no, of course, yeah, they could just get a waiver and then they just don't understand it. It's frustrating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about your caseload and like the number of cases that could be handled if there was some sort of reasonable standard, and if judges had the tools to just be like, you know what, let's get rid of this thing. And that's kind of what we had the last couple of years of the Obama administration. It was pretty nice. I guess that depended a lot on where you were, but in Seattle, at least, they were pretty good with prosecutorial discretion. But anyhow, here we are. So,
speaking of prosecutorial discretion,
yeah,
How about prosecutorial blindness?
Blindness?
Or governmental blindness?
What do you want to talk about first? You want to talk about Honduras?
Yeah, let's talk about governmental blindness.
All right. So as you know, we've got some cool new programs, right, in the asylum world. As of yesterday, we've deported 127 Hondurans and Salvadorans to Guatemala in order to seek asylum in Guatemala. Now, this is different from the MPP, right?
Yeah.
The MPP says you can apply for asylum in the U.S., but you just have to wait in Mexico. And this program says you don't even get to apply here. You have to apply in Guatemala.
But fortunately, Guatemala is an advanced society with a robust justice system and protections for the vulnerable. So
I think I read somewhere that they have 11 asylum officers. That's a true number.
It's probably not that many.
It's probably not that many. Even if they had 4,000 asylum officers, it's a dangerous place to live. And so, cool move, everybody. But we're in the process of implementing a new sort of layer to this program, which would allow us to send asylum seekers to Honduras. So it's good to have choices, right? It's like the free market. Competition starts kicking in.
Yeah, and good thing Honduras is really stable and safe.
Yeah, Honduras is totally stable and safe. So this is DHS Secretary Wolf. He said, acting, that's right. As my meeting today with the president of Honduras reiterated, Honduras understands the role that they're well positioned to play when it comes to offering asylum in the region. Now, I'm not a great lawyer, and I've won asylum cases from Honduras. So here's the Secretary of DHS, or the acting secretary, saying that Honduras is well positioned to offer asylum in the region. The implementation of the Asylum Cooperative Agreement, or ACA, is a critical step in Honduras on undertaking this humanitarian responsibility. I am pleased to say that our teams, as the president has mentioned, have finalized the joint implementation steps so that we can begin implementing it in the coming weeks. So, seems great, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is weird that the president of Honduras' brother was just convicted of being a narco trafficker, one of the world's largest narco traffickers, and that the president of Honduras himself was implicated in that scheme.
Well,
it just seems odd that we would be entering into this type of cooperative agreement with someone with that type of history.
You say implicated as if that's, a bad thing.
Yeah.
He's only accused of taking millions and millions of dollars in bribes to look the other way. I mean, he had a small role as president. So President Juan Orlando Hernandez, he's the one who actually just met with acting Secretary Wolf.
Chad.
Yeah.
Chad.
So his brother, Chad. Oh, yeah, Chad.
Hey, Chad.
So Chad and President Hernandez met, I think it was yesterday.
Have you met Chad? That's not honestly.
Yes, actually.
Really?
Okay. How dare you? Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yes.
Are they related to you?
No. Don't be rude. Come on.
Yeah.
So his brother was accused of allegedly running how much cocaine to the United States? Like a backpack full? Like how much do you think?
Probably like a little baggie. Right? Something for personal use, right?
Personal use. No, it's actually tons of cocaine to the United States.
Well, that'd be a lot.
Now, tons.
I mean, yeah, I think for the uneducated or unsophisticated listeners, they might not understand, but tons is a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I'm assuming, to be fair, the New York Times could be using it in the colloquial sense, like lots.
Yeah.
Right? Lots of cocaine.
Like, man, I got tons of love for you, baby.
Exactly. But tons technically would be over 4,000 pounds, right? Or at least 4,000 pounds. So that's a lot.
Yeah.
And as you know, this president is especially concerned with drug trafficking. Our president, right? That's why we need a wall and all these things. That's the president's brother, though. And that's not necessarily the president himself. Although, it does look like he took millions of dollars in bribes, including from El Chapo himself. Allegedly went to Honduras and put bricks and bricks of money, cash, on the table for the president to look the other way.
Well, I mean, let's be clear. And I think the prosecutors in the Southern District of New York would back this up if they could say it. The only reason why Juan Hernandez Orlando is not in the same position as his brother is because he's the president of Honduras. And he's in Honduras.
Right.
If he stops becoming president of Honduras and visits New York or the United States in any capacity, he'll be arrested and he'll be indicted and he'll be in jail. And I don't think there's any doubt about that. And the thing, it's the Department of Homeland Security.
Right.
You cannot tell me they don't know this.
We did learn earlier this week, actually, that you can drone kill somebody as long as they're a bad guy. So,
Well, I mean,
maybe there's a quicker way to handle this. That was a bad
Well,
joke.
I mean, I think it kind of all flows together. Juan Hernandez, the president of Honduras, is a major narco trafficker. And now the United States is going to send him help, for his narco trafficking buddies.
Right.
Because what's going to happen to the vulnerable asylum seekers when they're sent to Honduras? They're going to be even more vulnerable. They're vulnerable in their own country. How many clients have you had that were recruited or forced into assisted narco trafficking gangs? This is exactly what's going to happen.
So we're in a situation now where we're going to have Hondurans sent to Guatemala, Guatemalans sent to Honduras. It's absolutely insane. And you know what this reminds me of? I don't know how many times. So in an asylum case, judges hate getting hundreds of pages of just generic country conditions reports. I've had a lot of judges complain about that, but then they'll deny saying like, well, there's no evidence that, that something is happening. But we'll submit maybe in a lighter case, let's say 150 pages, but normally it's more than that, of direct evidence about these types of places, that there's torture happening, that it happens. For example, in Mexico, there's lots of evidence that Mexican law enforcement engages in torture. Usually it's to solicit or elicit false confessions or information about, whatever. So they'll arbitrarily arrest people. They're allowed to hold them for a certain amount of time, and they'll engage in torture. And there's lots of evidence of this. And then the judges will say things like, I've reviewed all the evidence, and nothing in the record suggests that the Mexican government would engage in torture. Right? Does this ever happen to you?
Yeah.
These broad sweeping, nothing in the record suggests. Right. It just reminds me of that, right? Like nothing in the record suggests Honduras can't be a good place for asylum seekers. And meanwhile, like the president himself is engaged in this major drug trafficking conspiracy. Again, tons of cocaine. We're not talking about like backpacks full. So it's just a good plan all around, good strategy here.
I mean, so we're talking about how, the president, but I mean, what this is really designed to do is we get these people out of our country and we get them somewhere where we know they're not going to stay in Honduras. We know they're not going to stay in Guatemala, right? I mean, do you think there's any thought that someone from El Salvador deported to Guatemala is going to stay in Guatemala?
Probably not.
I mean, and that's the point. And it's so hard to follow who's litigating what and whatnot, but it just seems like this has to be illegal. Someone's got to be litigating it, right?
Somebody do something about this, please. Now, along the same lines, we had talked about, I think last week, that there were plans to send Mexican nationals also to Guatemala.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That totally makes sense.
Because they're totally going to stay in Guatemala too.
And it's totally safe there, right? That's the other thing. Now,
I'm waiting for the Russian pact and send them to Siberia.
Exactly. So this was reported and confirmed, but then it turns out that the Mexican government and the Guatemalan government were like, wait, what? They hadn't really heard about this or agreed to it, and so it's been put on hold. This reminds me again of your one-word prediction for the Trump administration, which was chaos. There's just going to be this sense of what is even going on. And that's exactly what's going on here, where it's reported that, hey, this is a thing that's about to happen. DHS confirms it. And then these foreign countries are like, what are you even talking about? We haven't agreed to this. And now it's sort of in this weird limbo. The one thing I think that gets lost in this sometimes, let's imagine for a second that like Guatemala was pretty safe and it was a pretty good alternative. Most of the people who come here to seek asylum are doing it because they already have family here and they have a place where they can stay and they've got some sort of ties to employment or that sort of thing.
You'll see like the right wingers and like the people from FAIR and CIS and all that and be like, yeah, well, you'll see if they're really committed to being refugees. Like we'll send them to Guatemala. And if they're really afraid of their home country, they won't have any problem with that. But that's like, let's say you got shot in the stomach.
Mm-hmm.
And you go to like this really nice hospital with an emergency room that's really fantastic by your house. The one that's kind of close that you're familiar with. And then they pick you up and they take you far away to an emergency room that is
so like a veterinarian clinic.
That's disgusting. That's unsanitary. That doesn't have any doctors. And they have, a couple of nurses that aren't all that well trained. And say, look, if it's really an emergency, you'll be happy to be here.
Right.
But you hear it all the time. Like, well, why did you really come to the United States? You told the Border Patrol you came to work. Well, yeah. I mean, that's what these people do, right? People need to work to survive. I mean, most people know that, right? But it's just all, I can't even believe that we're talking about this. Even with this administration, I can't believe that this is a thing.
Yeah, it's insane. So, I mean, you just can imagine a situation where like you're from Michoacan, Mexico, and you've been recruited by some cartel and they've threatened your family and you've had neighbors turn up dead. It's a very credible threat. You hear gunshots all the time. You've seen bodies like on the side of the road or whatever. So you've got siblings or maybe parents or cousins who live in Yakima. And they say, hey, you know what? Like, we're about to start pruning again, and there's going to be work here, and you can sleep on the couch for a while. So you make the trip all the way up to the border, and now there's a real chance that they would detain you. I guess that's always been the possibility. But then actually deport you to Guatemala, a country that's like also dangerous, by the way, and where you don't have anyone. It's just insanely cruel. And obviously doesn't have anything in mind other than deterrence, I don't think. There's no argument that could be made that we're unable to absorb these people into our communities, or we're overwhelmed with requests, or...
No, we're full.
Yeah, we're full. Like none of those are...
You've read those comments, right?
Oh, sure.
Full.
Yeah, right.
Can't take any more. Well, I mean, at least we're not at war. I just want to have some positive...
Hey, yeah, that's true. Not yet. We did announce some cool sanctions, so that's awesome.
My favorite, I mean, just to segue awkwardly to the Iran thing, the killing of General Soleimani, I mean, just this administration saying that they were imminent threats going.
Oh, yeah.
And then Mike Pompeo comes out.
I've got that. Let's listen to it real quick.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Secretary, the administration said this strike was done based on an imminent threat. But this morning, you said we didn't know precisely when and we didn't know precisely where. That's not the definition of imminent. The president has also suggested that there was some sort of attack being planned against an embassy, perhaps several embassies. Can you clarify? Did you have specific information about an imminent threat? And did it have anything to do with our embassies?
We had specific information on an imminent threat. And those threat stream included attacks on U.S. embassies. Period. Full stop.
So you were mistaken when you said you didn't know precisely when and you didn't know precisely where.
Nope. Completely true. Those are completely consistent thoughts. I don't know exactly which minute. We don't know exactly which day it would have been executed. But it was very clear. Qasem Soleimani himself was plotting a broad, large-scale attack against American interests. And those attacks were imminent.
Against an embassy.
Against American facilities, including American embassies, military bases, American facilities throughout the region.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Guess we had to kill him.
I like it. That's not the definition of imminent. Just reporters have to like fact check the English language. Then where are we? as a society.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think Trump should be impeached on, honestly, if you can't gin up this country for a war in the Middle East, it's just political incompetence. They did the whole thing backwards. Like, they killed the guy and then they tried to teach us about how he was such a bad guy. Obviously, you got to do the second thing first.
Well, yeah, I mean, they could have waited for like the airliner to get shot down and then thrown a couple like Americans on the registry and then said that was an act of war. These guys have got to learn.
Literally, like every minute, the justification for the assassination changes. But anyways, I wanted to talk real quick about Jared Kushner.
Oh, well, what is odd, because another little segue, right? And I can't even believe we're talking about the trouble in the Middle East, because I thought he was fixing it. It should have been fixed by now. I mean, if JK couldn't handle it, that's weird.
Okay. Yeah, well, he also, after he fixed the Middle East, he was, I don't know if you remember this, but he was assigned specifically to broker peace on the immigration issue. Now, just a little bit of background on Kushner. He gave this interview with Axios a few months ago. I think it was in the summertime. And he talked about his grandparents. His grandparents survived the Holocaust. This show is not normally depressing enough. We decided to bring up the Holocaust. So his grandparents did some interviews back in the 90s when they were trying to preserve some of these narratives. And they survived some really horrific circumstances and things, obviously. His grandmother, her sister was killed, and some other family were killed. She's from Poland. So they ended up going to Italy. They were in a, what do you call it, like a displaced persons camp for, I think, like 4 years. They were applying for visas everywhere. They couldn't get in, and they eventually made their way to the United States. But Kushner was asked about this, and he says, they were able to build a great life for themselves. It's a great reminder of how great this country is, where my grandparents could be on the precipice of life or death and then come to this country, and 70 years later, their grandson's working in the White House. And that's true. That's a true thing. And then Jonathan Swan, the reporter from Axios, asked him, what about this decision to slash America's refugee intake to the lowest level in 40 years? And he defended the decision, saying that the overall numbers are irrelevant given the scale of the global refugee crisis. So,
I mean, we really can't do much to help, so why even bother?
If you can't help 100% of the people, then it doesn't matter if it's like zero.
People get mad at me when I'm like walking down the street and I just throw my trash on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, hey, dude, put it in a trash can, like the environment. And I'm like, listen, have you seen all the trash in the ocean?
Right.
Like, what's this? This is nothing. But go ahead.
Oh, if I throw my wrapper in the garbage can, that means that 100% of the garbage is going to be in the trash can?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
So JK has a point.
JK has a point. Okay, so that's pretty disturbing that in light of, I don't know exactly how much he has to do with these plans to send asylum seekers to Guatemala or Honduras. And again, about that whole program, these are agreements that are based 100% on us bullying these countries into agreeing to do these things. Like, it has nothing to do with actual good faith agreements.
Or maybe bribing.
Right. So I don't know to what degree he's involved in all that, but it's, he was tasked with fixing immigration, and here we are. So, but there was a story that was just reported by ProPublica about how it turns out his grandparents, like I mentioned before, they were stuck in Italy for about 4 years after the war. And in 1948, 3 years after the war, there were only 847 Jews resettled in the United States by aid groups. So we weren't exactly doing our job or our part. But if we apply the Kushner logic, there were a lot of displaced Jews. And even if we'd taken, say, 10,000, it's irrelevant to the overall problem, right? And it also turns out that his grandparents engaged in a little bit of chicanery in order to get their visa to the United States. So they found out that it was easier to get visas as a father, son, daughter type of a relationship rather than a married couple. And so his father, who was born Yosel Berkowitz, changed his name to Joseph Kushner, and they indicated that he was the son of his father-in-law, like the biological son. In other words, that he was the brother of his wife.
They should have separated them.
And they also put on their forms that they were from Germany rather than Poland because they'd heard that would improve their odds. Now, this is not like to dunk on the Kushners, right? I'm glad that they made it here. In my practice and in your practice, I'm sure, like, we do not encourage fraud. And if somebody came to us and said, should we make these two materialize to improve our chances, we, in our professional capacity, would have to say, no, we can't help you with that. But it just...
What you're saying is now there's kind of an unforgiven policy from this administration where maybe hypocritical?
Yeah, what happens to his grandparents now? First of all, they probably don't get a visa to come as a refugee. Well, maybe they make their way to Central America and come up to try to apply for asylum at the southern border. And now they could be deported to Guatemala, right? Or maybe to Honduras soon.
Or maybe just left to stay in Mexico in the streets of Tijuana.
Or, locked up or separated or whatever.
Or they question the familiar status and they separate them.
Right, exactly. It's disturbing that he, the attitude that he has towards the current crisis is that, well, it's a drop in the bucket. There's nothing we can do. And so it's fine. We can't help everyone. That's the exact same rationale that was applied at the time for keeping Jewish refugee numbers so low.
I mean, also anti-Semitism, right?
Right.
And you see the same threads of discrimination against Muslims now. So history is fickle. It's always going to repeat itself. And it should be our job to be better, right? With knowing the history, but apparently not.
Right. His grandparents shouldn't have had to make those misrepresentations. Like, we should have been better. And knowing that should drive us now to actually be better and not be worse. Kind of stating the obvious.
Right. It's like Melania, be best. This show sucks.
My daughter has a shirt that says, be your best.
Oh, right? Look at her. She got it right.
She's 3. It's like,
was it like a be best shirt and she just like took out a marker and wrote your?
It's cute because the your has YOU in white and then the R in black. So the shirt technically says be you and be your best.
Aww.
It's like, how is this shirt for a 3-year-old more clever than, whatever the White House thing is? Anyways, Matthew.
Yes, sir.
One last thing. Friend of the show, Jim Baker.
Oh.
Has some thoughts on supporting our president.
We haven't talked to him for a while. When's he coming back on?
Well, let's see.
You know what? Trump is a test. Whether you're even saved. Only saved people can love Trump. No, you got to be really saved. You got to forgive. You got to be able to forgive. You forgive when you're saved.
Yeah. So basically, what you really want in a president is just like the shittiest possible person, because that will put a lot of pressure on you as a Christian to exercise your forgiveness muscles or something.
I wonder how forgiven Jim Baker was of Obama.
I had, I think it was yesterday's program, I said, I think this hurricane is something to do with what Obama did a few days ago.
Well, the forgiveness muscles are
you can only go so far.
Only have to be exercised every 8 years or so.
Only when women's reproduction rights are being restricted.
Right.
That's a test. Well, this is a depressing show. No, screw this.
Screw this.
We had a positive show. We should try to be more positive, Stephen. And look what you did. You depressed me for the day.
I know. Let me tell you a quick positive story. Okay. So we had a work permit sort of arbitrarily denied because we, according to them, just applied too soon. And so I called the Vermont Service Center. I left them a message and I said, hey, this is the only service center that allows this, that even has a voicemail system. I said, I really love you guys and I love your work, but I think you might have screwed this one up. And rather than having us file an appeal and going through this long thing, could you just like reopen it and grant it? And a nice lady from the Vermont Service Center called me the very next day and she said, Yeah, I think you're right. I pulled the file and it's with a supervisor now, but yeah, that looks like a screw up. Sorry about that. And it was approved like a week later. So on the one hand, this is a good story because it's just the government being reasonable and fixing a thing. But on the other hand, circling back to depression, it's a depressing story because it means that the government has the capacity to do stuff like
all
this.
Our good stories, right, are like, oh, the government did this really horrible thing, and this is the extraordinary steps, not that making a phone call at the Vermont Service Center is extraordinary, but all these steps that we had to take to remedy it.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
the government
kudos
spent
to you.
$40,000 to try and deport this person over the course of 10 years, and we stopped it barely. What a positive story. Oh, yeah.
I have a positive story, but I don't want to tell that. So,
all right, cool.
I'll tell it to Patreons if they're interested.
All right, let's do that. I'll talk to you later.
Night.
Bye.